Just one kiss, murmured the millionaire tied by contract, yet fated for real love. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain hammered against the windows of the quiet café on the corner of Fifth Avenue, the kind of night when most people hurried home, collars up, umbrellas tilted against the storm. Inside, the warm glow of pendant lights softened the edges of the room, and the scent of roasted coffee beans floated through the air. At a corner table, a man sat waiting. His name was Alexander Hale, 33 years old, a self-made millionaire with a reputation as ruthless in the boardroom as he was untouchable in society. Tonight, however, he was not wearing his usual armor of polished arrogance. Tonight, he had come to make an offer that would change two lives forever. Across the room, Claire Bennett pushed through the glass door, her second-hand coat dripping with rain, her backpack heavy on her shoulder. She was 24, balancing student loan debt, her mother's mounting hospital bills, and the looming threat of eviction. Every step she took inside that cafe felt like stepping into a world that did not belong to her. Her eyes swept nervously over the room until they landed on the sharply dressed man with storm-gray eyes. Alexander rose slowly, his tailored suit catching the light. "Claire Bennett?" he asked, his voice steady, calm, and unnervingly direct. She hesitated, clutching the strap of her backpack tighter. "Yes, that is me. But, how do you know my name?" He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please. Sit." The silence stretched as she lowered herself onto the seat, rainwater dripping from her coat to the polished floor. Her heartbeat thundered louder than the storm outside. Finally, Alexander leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. "I know about your debts," he said simply. "I know about the hospital bills. I know about the eviction notice pinned to your apartment door." Claire's face drained of color. Who are you?" "My name is Alexander Hale," he said, his gaze locking on hers. "And I have a proposal for you." She blinked, confused, every instinct screaming that she should stand up and leave, but something about his tone so certain, so final pinned her to the chair. "What kind of proposal?" Alexander's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. Then, with a calmness that cut through the storm, he spoke the words that would forever mark this night. "Marry me. Think of it as a contract." Claire's breath caught. For a second, she wondered if she had misheard. The thunder outside cracked, echoing the disbelief pounding through her chest. You cannot be serious," she stammered. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Alexander replied, his voice deep, steady. "You are young. You are desperate enough to consider this. And I am a man in need of a wife. Not for love, not for romance, but for appearances. My board of directors demands stability. A wife gives me that. And in return," his voice dropped lower, deliberate, "you will never have to worry about money again. I will clear every debt. I will cover your mother's care. I will give you back your life." The cafe seemed to shrink around her. Claire felt the air grow thick, pressing against her lungs. She wanted to laugh, to call it insane, to run out into the storm and never look back. But then she saw it. His eyes, unwavering, cold steel, with a flicker of something else. Something she could not name. Her throat tightened. "And what do you want in return?" she whispered. Alexander leaned closer, his gaze unrelenting. "Your signature on a contract, your hand in marriage, and your promise to play the part, no questions, no feelings, no exceptions." Oh, the rain beat harder against the glass as Claire sat frozen, every nerve in her body screaming that this was impossible. Yet deep inside, she knew her choices were running out. And that single sentence, spoken in a storm-lit cafe by a man she barely knew, would change the course of everything. Claire left the cafe that night with the storm still clinging to her clothes, her mind in a haze that no umbrella could shield. The sound of Alexander Hale's words echoed with every step she took. "Marry me. Think of it as a contract." It was absurd. It was impossible. And yet the offer wrapped around her like the rain-soaked coat she hugged closer to her body. By the time she reached her tiny apartment, the hallway lights flickered overhead, throwing long shadows against the peeling paint. The air smelled faintly of damp carpet and old dust. On her door was the slip she had feared most, a bright orange eviction notice taped in the center like a cruel announcement. Her stomach sank. She ripped it down with trembling hands, clutching the paper as if she could will the ink to fade. Inside, the one-bedroom unit was nearly bare. A second-hand sofa sagged against the wall. The kitchen sink dripped steadily, each drop a reminder of unpaid bills. On the table sat a pile of envelopes, all stamped final notice. Claire dropped her bag and sank into the rickety chair. For a long moment, she simply stared at the eviction slip in her hands. Then the sound of coughing reached her ears. "Claire?" Her mother's frail voice floated from the bedroom. Claire hurried inside. Her mother, thin and pale from months of illness, struggled to sit up against the pillows. "Did you get the medication?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Claire forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I will pick it up tomorrow, Mom. Do not worry." But she did worry. Every prescription cost more than she could afford. The last of her savings had gone to rent, and even that had not been enough. She tucked the blanket around her mother and brushed back the strands of silver hair from her forehead. "Try to sleep," she whispered. When her mother's breathing evened out, Claire slipped back to the kitchen. She opened her backpack and pulled out a notebook filled with figures, crossed-out job postings, and desperate calculations. No matter how many times she added or subtracted, the numbers told the same story. There was no way out. She remembered Alexander's face in the café, calm and unreadable. The way his voice had dropped when he said he could erase her debts, pay for her mother's care, and give her back her life. It had sounded like a devil's bargain. But staring at the bills spread across the table, she wondered if she had the luxury of refusing. The next day, Claire dragged herself through another long shift at the diner where she worked nights. The smell of grease clung to her clothes, and her feet ached from hours on the tile floor. She balanced trays of burgers and coffee, forced a smile for customers who never looked her in the eye, and counted every dollar in tips like a lifeline. When she finally stepped out into the cold night air, her breath fogging in front of her, the weight of reality pressed heavier than the tray she had carried. As she walked home, she passed a storefront window, glowing with warm light. Inside, couples laughed over dinner, their lives untouched by eviction notices or hospital bills. Claire paused, her reflection faint against the glass-wet hair plastered to her face. Coat too thin for the season, eyes tired beyond her years. For the first time, she whispered aloud what she had been denying since last night. "What if I said yes?" The words lingered, frightening and strangely comforting at the same time. When she returned home, her mother was asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. Claire sat beside her bed and held her hand. In the dim light, her mother looked smaller than ever, fragile as glass. Claire's chest ached with helplessness. She bent her head close and whispered, "I will find a way, Mom. I promise." "Oh?" But she knew promises did not pay bills. Promises did not erase debt. Promises did not buy medication. Only Alexander Hale's impossible offer had the power to do that. For the next 3 days, Claire lived in a fog. She went through the motions at the diner, smiled at her mother, and tried to ignore the eviction date circled on the calendar. But the words, "Marry me," think of it as a contract returned every time she closed her eyes. It was madness. It was dangerous, but it was also the only chance she had left. On the 4th night, rain began to fall again. Claire stood by her window, watching droplets slide down the glass. Somewhere in the city, Alexander Hale was waiting for her decision. She pressed her forehead against the cold pane, her heart pounding with fear and a desperate kind of hope. Whispering into the empty room, she admitted the truth. "I cannot do this alone." And in that moment, Claire realized the choice she had tried so hard to avoid was already made. Claire's hands shook as she dialed the number on the sleek card Alexander Hale had slid across the café table days ago. She had stared at that card each night, as if the ink might disappear if she waited long enough. Tonight, with eviction only hours away, and her mother's health declining, she pressed the call button. A voice answered, smooth and clipped. "This is Hale." Her throat tightened. "It is Claire Bennett. I want to talk about your offer." There was a pause, long enough that she wondered if he had hung up. Then his voice returned, calm and unwavering. "Meet me tomorrow at noon. Brooks Tower, 42nd floor. Do not be late." The line went dead. Claire barely slept. The next morning, she wrapped herself in her worn coat and rode the subway uptown, the screech of the rails matching the rhythm of her pounding heart. When she stepped into the lobby of Brooks Tower, the vast marble floors gleamed beneath chandeliers. Men in tailored suits and women in heels clicked past her, not sparing a glance at the girl with scuffed shoes and tired eyes. By the time she reached the 42nd floor, her palms were slick with sweat. A receptionist in a navy suit led her into a spacious office, where floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto the city skyline. Alexander Hale stood by the glass, his back to her, hands in his pockets. He did not turn as he spoke. "You came." Claire swallowed hard. "I did." Finally, he faced her. The storm-gray eyes she remembered from the café studied her without emotion. "Sit." She obeyed, sinking into a leather chair that felt too grand for her. Alexander crossed to the desk and opened a sleek black folder. From inside, he slid out several sheets of paper and placed them in front of her. "This is the agreement," he said. "Read it carefully." Claire's gaze fell on the stark letters at the top. Marriage contract. Her pulse quickened as she scanned the first page. Clear, cold terms leapt out at her. Clause 1. The marriage will be in name only. No intimacy, no expectations of affection. Clause 2. Claire Bennett will attend 5 public events as the spouse of Alexander Hale. Clause 3. Confidentiality is absolute. Breach of secrecy will result in termination of the agreement and forfeiture of benefits. Clause 4. No physical closeness outside of public appearances. No kiss. No exceptions. Her eyes stopped at that line. No kiss. The words blurred, absurd, and strangely intimate in their restriction. She looked up. This is insane." Alexander's expression did not change. "So is allowing yourself to drown when a lifeline is being offered." Claire's chest tightened. "And what do I receive for selling my dignity?" He leaned forward, his voice even, steady. "Every debt erased. Full medical coverage for your mother. A secure trust in your name. In return, you sign, you wear the ring, and you play the part. For 1 year." "1 year?" she echoed. "1 year," he repeated. Silence stretched between them. The hum of the city below filled the room. Claire's hands trembled as she turned another page, each clause pressing down like a weight. She thought of the eviction notice, the medicine her mother needed, the sleepless nights at the diner. Logic told her this was madness, but desperation whispered louder. Her voice cracked as she asked, "Why me? You could have chosen anyone." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth, not quite. More like weariness. "Because you are unattached, because you are ordinary, and because you are desperate enough not to mistake this for romance." Claire felt the sting of his words. She was ordinary, desperate, disposable. And yet, sitting across from him, she realized this man was as trapped as she was, though his cage was made of glass and gold. Her fingers tightened around the pen he placed beside the papers. She could still walk away. She could let everything collapse. But then her mother's face flashed before her eyes, pale and fragile against the pillows. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she lowered the pen to the line at the bottom of the page. Her hand moved, shaky but certain. The ink formed her name, Claire Bennett. Alexander reached across, his signature sharp and practiced beneath hers. He closed the folder with a decisive snap. "It is done," he said, his voice final. Claire sat frozen, the weight of her choice settling over her shoulders. She had signed away her freedom for survival. And as Alexander slipped a ring from a velvet box and slid it across the desk, his eyes met hers with something unreadable. "Welcome to the contract, Mrs. Hale." The words echoed through her, chilling and binding all at once. The wedding happened quickly, as if it were nothing more than another business transaction for Alexander Hale. A courthouse ceremony, witnessed by his attorney and a notary, with words recited in monotone and signatures sealed with a stamp. There were no flowers, no music, no family. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander's jaw remained set, his expression unreadable. Claire forced herself to breathe as he turned to her, his hand brushing hers for only a second. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Hale," he said, his voice even, almost clinical. The words made her stomach twist. By the time they drove through the iron gates of Hale Estate that evening, Claire felt as if she had stepped into another universe. The mansion loomed like a monument, its white columns lit by spotlights, its stone facade imposing against the night sky. The driveway seemed to stretch forever, lined with manicured hedges and fountains frozen in motion. Inside, the foyer opened beneath a glittering chandelier. Marble floors stretched in every direction, and paintings older than her entire family hung in ornate frames along the walls. A housekeeper appeared instantly to take her coat, her polite smile revealing nothing. Alexander gestured toward the grand staircase. "Your room is upstairs. Dinner is served at 7. You will be expected to join me." Claire nodded, clutching her small suitcase like a lifeline. As she followed a staff member up the sweeping stairs, she caught her reflection in the gilded mirrors. The thrift store dress she had worn to the courthouse seemed almost laughable in a house like this. She looked out of place, a pawn who had wandered onto the wrong chessboard. Her room was larger than her entire apartment. A 4-poster bed draped in silk, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden that seemed more like a park. Antique furniture, polished to a shine. It was beautiful, but it was cold. No warmth, no traces of a life lived. She set her suitcase down and sat at the edge of the bed, her hands trembling against the smooth quilt. When the clock struck 7, she descended the staircase. The dining room was cavernous, the long mahogany table stretching farther than her eyes could follow. Alexander sat at the far end, perfectly composed in a dark suit. Silverware gleamed under crystal lights as servers placed dishes in front of them. Claire picked at her food, unable to taste a single bite. The silence pressed against her until she finally spoke. "This house feels like a museum." Alexander's eyes lifted from his plate. "That is the point. Order, discipline, no room for chaos." "Aye." Her fork clinked softly against her plate. "It feels lonely." For a moment, his gaze held hers. There was no flicker of warmth, no apology, only that same controlled calm. Loneliness is easier to manage than betrayal. The words caught her off guard. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the steel in his tone warned her not to pry. She stayed quiet, focusing instead on the small details. The way his hand curled tightly around his wine glass, the way his shoulders tensed when silence stretched too long. After dinner, Claire returned to her room, her mind heavy. She opened the window, letting the night air spill inside. The gardens glowed under moonlight, a world too perfect, too distant from her reality. She thought of her mother's small apartment, the sound of the leaky faucet, the warmth of her hand in Claire's, and she wondered if she had sold her soul to live in this palace of ice. The days that followed blurred into a strange routine. Lessons in etiquette from a stylist Alexander hired. Instructions from his assistant on how to behave at charity galas and corporate dinners. Dresses delivered in boxes tied with satin bows. She stumbled through it all. Her awkward mistakes earning cool corrections, but never anger from Alexander. Once, when she tripped on the hem of a gown during a rehearsal dinner, she braced herself for his ridicule. Instead, Alexander caught her arm with surprising speed, steadying her before she fell. His grip was firm, protective. For a moment, she looked up at him, expecting to see annoyance. But there was only silence, his expression unreadable. He released her gently, stepping back as if nothing had happened. That night, Claire lay awake in the vast bed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere beneath the cold exterior, she sensed something hidden in him, a wound, a secret, a reason for the fortress he had built around himself. She did not know why, but she found herself wanting to understand. Still, she reminded herself of the contract. No intimacy, no closeness, no kiss. And yet, the memory of his hand catching hers lingered, warm against her skin, as if it had left a mark that no contract could erase. The first real test of their arrangement came sooner than Claire expected. A week after she moved into Hale Estate, Alexander's assistant delivered a schedule that made her stomach twist. A charity gala, hosted at one of the city's grandest hotels, with hundreds of powerful guests in attendance. Her role was clear: stand by Alexander's side, smile when appropriate, and play the part of the dutiful wife. On the evening of the event, a car waited at the base of the staircase. Claire descended slowly, her gown a river of midnight silk, borrowed elegance, she barely recognized as her own. Alexander stood waiting, his tuxedo sharp, his posture perfect. His eyes swept over her once, unreadable as always. "You will do," he said simply, before offering his arm. The ride into the city was quiet. Claire kept her gaze fixed on the blur of lights beyond the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Every part of her wanted to vanish before the night even began. When they entered the ballroom, the weight of 100 eyes fell on her at once. The chandeliers blazed overhead, strings swelled from the orchestra, and the air carried the mingled perfume of wealth and power. Claire's pulse raced as whispers rippled through the crowd. She heard fragments. "Who is she? So young. Not his usual type." Each word stung, reminding her how little she belonged here. Alexander, however, moved as if the room were his kingdom. He guided her with a firm hand at her back, introducing her with a smile that never quite touched his eyes. "My wife, Claire Hale." The words sent a shiver through her. Wife. It still felt like a role she had stepped into by accident. At first, Claire stayed quiet, nodding politely, hiding behind Alexander's presence. But then came the moment she could not avoid. A group of journalists cornered them. Cameras flashing. Microphones thrust forward. One woman asked pointedly, "Mrs. Hale, how does it feel to marry one of the most powerful men in the country?" Some say it was a sudden decision. Care to explain? Claire froze, her throat dry, the eyes of the room drilling into her. Alexander's jaw tightened beside her, as if daring her to slip. Something inside her snapped. Straightening her shoulders, she forced her voice steady. "It feels like stepping into a storm and finding shelter where you least expected it," she said. "Sudden? Perhaps, but sometimes the unexpected things in life are the ones most worth protecting." For a heartbeat, silence hovered. Then cameras clicked faster, and murmurs spread through the crowd. Claire felt her cheeks burn, but when she glanced at Alexander, she caught the faintest flicker of surprise in his eyes. He inclined his head slightly, almost like a silent acknowledgement. "Well done." The rest of the night passed in a blur. Claire answered questions, laughed when she needed to, and clung to Alexander's cues. By the time they slipped back into the waiting car, her body ached with exhaustion, but her heart carried a strange new weight. The car moved through the glittering city streets, reflections of neon lights sliding across the windows. Claire leaned back against the seat, exhaling shakily. "I thought I would faint back there." Alexander studied her in the dim glow of the passing lights. "You did not." "No." She turned to him, searching his face. "You actually thought I could handle it?" He looked away, his profile sharp against the glass. "I thought you had no choice. And sometimes, that brings out strength you did not know you had." The words struck deeper than she expected. She stared at him for a long moment, wondering what it cost him to sound, almost human, almost kind. When they arrived back at Hale Estate, Alexander offered no further comment. He disappeared into his office, leaving Claire to climb the stairs alone. Yet as she reached her room, she caught herself smiling faintly. Not because she had played the part well, but because for the first time, she had seen Alexander's armor shift, if only slightly. That night, lying beneath the heavy blankets, she replayed the evening again and again. The lights, the questions, the way she had stood her ground when she wanted to run. And most of all, the way Alexander had looked at her, not with disdain, not with indifference, but with something she could not yet name. The contract had forbidden closeness, but Claire could not deny the truth growing quietly inside her. A part of her wanted to know the man behind the mask, and if she was not careful, that desire could cost her far more than the debts she had tried to escape. The weeks after the gala settled into a rhythm, though nothing about it felt ordinary. By day, Claire attended fittings, etiquette lessons, and endless preparations for events she barely understood. By night, she wandered the vast halls of Hale Estate, the silence pressing against her until it became unbearable. One evening, after yet another exhausting charity dinner, Claire slipped away from the grand staircase and climbed to the rooftop terrace. The city stretched below in glittering lights, a sea of movement and sound that made her feel both small and alive. The wind tugged at her hair, cool against her flushed cheeks. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned to see Alexander, his tie loosened, his jacket slung casually over one arm. He looked different like this, less polished, less guarded, almost human. "I thought you preferred the ballroom," she said softly. "I prefer quiet," he replied, setting his jacket across the railing. "But quiet is rare in my world." "Oh." Claire studied him in the dim glow of the city lights. His shoulders seemed heavier than usual, as if the weight of his empire pressed down even here. "Why do you do it?" she asked suddenly. "The galas, the appearances, the charade. You are already powerful. Why keep playing this endless game?" His gaze lingered on the skyline before he spoke. "Because power is fragile. The moment you show weakness, vultures circle. I learned that the hard way." "Oh." There was a sharpness in his tone that made her hesitate, but curiosity pushed her forward. "What happened?" For a long moment, she thought he would ignore her. Then, with a breath that sounded heavier than the wind, he said, "I trusted someone once, a partner I thought loyal. He betrayed me, tried to take everything. I rebuilt from the ashes, stronger, colder, but betrayal leaves scars you do not show." Claire's chest tightened. For the first time, she saw the man behind the armor, a man shaped by loss and fear, not just ambition. "That is why you built walls," she whispered. He turned to her, his gray eyes reflecting the city lights. "Walls keep you alive." The silence between them stretched, heavy and fragile. Claire shivered as the night air cut deeper. Without a word, Alexander lifted his jacket from the railing and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth of the fabric startled her more than the gesture itself. She looked up at him, her voice barely audible. "Why are you kind to me now?" The contract said no closeness, no affection. His lips curved in something that was almost a smile, but too sad to be one. "Kindness is not affection, Mrs. Hale. Do not confuse the two." Yet his voice lacked conviction. Claire's heart pounded as she searched his face, catching glimpses of the man he tried to hide, the one who had once believed in trust, the one who feared loneliness more than betrayal. The sound of her phone buzzing in her pocket broke the moment. She pulled it out to see her mother's name on the screen. Excusing herself, she answered quickly. "Claire," her mother said weakly, "the doctor wants to run new tests. I do not know if I can afford them." Claire's eyes stung. She stepped toward the far edge of the terrace, lowering her voice. "Do not worry, Mom. I will handle it. Just focus on getting better." When she turned back, Alexander was watching her, his expression unreadable. "Your mother is unwell," he said, not as a question but as a certainty. Claire nodded, her throat tight. "She is the reason I am here, the reason I signed everything. Without her, none of this would matter." Alexander studied her for a long time. Finally, he said quietly, "Family makes us weak. But sometimes, weakness is the only thing that makes us human." Claire did not know what to say. The wind lifted the strands of her hair, the city humming below, the night holding them in a fragile pause. For the first time, she felt that their contract was not just binding them in obligation, it was pulling them closer in ways neither had expected. And though she told herself it was nothing, the echo of his words lingered, carving deeper into her heart than she wanted to admit. The fragile peace between them did not last long. Just as Claire began to believe she could navigate this strange life, the storm she had feared arrived. It began with whispers in the business pages, speculation about Alexander Hale's sudden marriage. At first, the comments were mild curiosity photographs from the gala, captions calling her the mysterious young wife. But soon the tone shifted. One morning, while Claire was at the breakfast table, the headline of a glossy magazine screamed, "From waitress to wife gold digger or Cinderella." Her stomach dropped. The article dissected her background, her mother's illness, even the eviction notice. Details she had never shared publicly, splashed across glossy pages for strangers to judge. She looked up to find Alexander holding the same magazine, his jaw tight. "This was bound to happen," he said coldly. You are not the first woman to be torn apart by speculation. Her voice shook. Speculation? They are calling me a fraud, a parasite. How did they even know about my mother? Before he could answer, the door to the dining room opened. It was his cousin, Victoria Hale, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. She placed her phone on the table, the headline glowing on the screen. Congratulations, Alexander. Your choice of bride has become the board's favorite topic. They want answers. Claire's chest tightened. The board? Victoria smirked. Did you really think no one would question why the city's most calculating bachelor suddenly married a struggling waitress? They believe this marriage is a farce, and they are not wrong. Her words sliced through the air. Claire flinched, but Alexander's expression turned to stone. Enough, Victoria, he said, his voice like steel. But Victoria leaned closer, her eyes locked on Claire. He will not protect you when it threatens his empire. Contracts end. Fortunes do not. The jab landed deep. Claire felt her breath catch, the walls of the grand dining room closing in. She pushed back her chair and stood, her hands trembling. I never asked for any of this, she whispered, her voice breaking. Alexander's eyes flicked toward her, but he said nothing. His silence cut deeper than Victoria's venom. Claire left the room, the echo of her footsteps swallowed by the endless halls. For the first time since signing the contract, she wondered if she had made a mistake far greater than her debts. That night, she stood before the mirror in her room, staring at the ring on her finger. It gleamed under the lamplight, beautiful and cold. She had told herself it was only a contract, a lifeline in her desperation. But now it felt like a shackle, one that the world was eager to use against her. And worst of all, Alexander's silence made her question the one fragile belief she had begun to hold that maybe, beneath the armor, he was capable of caring. In that silence, her heart cracked. Claire avoided Alexander for days after the confrontation with Victoria. She buried herself in silence, walking through the mansion like a ghost, her footsteps swallowed by the marble floors. Each time she saw him across the dining table, his eyes unreadable, his words clipped and cold, she felt the wall between them growing higher. Then came the night of another charity event, this time held at the grand ballroom of the City Museum. The air shimmered with chandeliers and diamonds, the press waiting eagerly at the entrance for a glimpse of the Hale couple. Claire stepped out of the car in a gown of silver satin, her hand resting stiffly on Alexander's arm. Cameras flashed like lightning, and the reporters shouted questions that pierced through the night. Inside, the whispers returned. Louder now. Gold digger. Opportunist. A deal, not a marriage. Claire tried to steady her breathing, but the words clung to her skin like frost. Halfway through the evening, as Alexander spoke with board members near the stage, Victoria struck again. She appeared at Claire's side, her smile razor-sharp. Do you really think this will last? Contracts expire. And when it does, Alexander will thank me for exposing you. Claire turned, her pulse racing. Why are you doing this? Victoria leaned close, her voice low and venomous. Because I will not allow you to sink your claws into this family. You are nothing more than a temporary distraction. Before Claire could respond, Victoria raised her voice deliberately, catching the attention of nearby guests. Tell us, Claire, how much did Alexander pay you for this little performance? Enough to cover your mother's hospital bills? The room stilled. Conversations faltered. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Claire's breath caught, humiliation flooding her cheeks. She opened her mouth, but no words came. And then Alexander was there. His presence cut through the crowd like a blade. His arm slipped around Claire's waist, pulling her close in a gesture so public, so deliberate, that the whispers shifted into stunned silence. His gray eyes blazed as they locked on Victoria. Careful, cousin, he said, his voice low but lethal. You mistake cruelty for power. I will not tolerate either. The room buzzed with shock. Alexander turned his gaze on Claire, his expression softening just enough for her to see something real. Then, in front of everyone, he broke the rule that had bound them since the beginning. He bent his head and kissed her. It was not the cold brush of a staged performance, not the empty formality of a contract. It was warm, unyielding, a declaration that silenced the room. The press cameras clicked wildly, flashes exploding like fireworks, but all Claire could feel was the strength of his hand at her back and the truth in that kiss. When he pulled away, the crowd erupted into a storm of voices. Victoria's face burned with fury. But she could not undo what had just happened. Alexander held Claire against him, his voice carrying enough to be heard over the chaos. "This marriage is mine to define, and I will not let anyone rewrite it." The words struck her deeper than the kiss itself. For the first time, Alexander had chosen to stand not as a man bound by contract, but as someone willing to risk everything for her. The fallout from that kiss spread through the city like wildfire. The next morning, headlines blazed across every newspaper and television screen. Alexander Hale breaks his own rules, a kiss that shook the gala. Commentators speculated endlessly. Reporters camped outside the gates of Hale Estate, and the board demanded explanations. But for Claire, the memory of that night lingered not as a scandal, but as proof. Alexander had chosen her, not the contract. Inside the mansion, the storm raged. Victoria returned with accusations, threatening to present evidence that their marriage was nothing more than a business deal. But Alexander was ready. With calm precision, he laid out documents proving her manipulation of company funds, her attempts to undermine his position on the board, and her vendetta against Claire. Before witnesses, he declared, "You sought to ruin my wife's name for your own gain. You will not have this empire. Not now. Not ever." Ho! Victoria's power crumbled, her threats dissolving into silence. Security escorted her out, her protests echoing against the marble halls. When the doors closed, Claire stood frozen. She had braced for Alexander to distance himself again, to retreat behind the mask of steel. Instead, he turned to her, his expression stripped of calculation. "I broke the contract," he said quietly. "That kiss was not business. It was not strategy. It was the truth." Claire's heart hammered in her chest. She searched his face, waiting for the coldness to return, but it never came. "Why?" she whispered. His eyes softened, the storm gray gentled into something she had never seen before. "Because somewhere between the lies and the silence, I found myself wanting what I swore I would never need. You." Tears stung her eyes, but she smiled through them. "Alexander." He stepped closer, taking her hand in his, the weight of the contract between them replaced by something far more fragile and far more powerful. "No more rules, Claire. No more distance. If you will let me, I want to rewrite this story with you." Her answer came not in words, but in the way she held his hand, steady and unafraid. For the first time since stepping into this mansion, she felt she belonged not as a pawn, not as a contract, but as his partner. Weeks later, under the glow of spring blossoms in the Hale Estate garden, Alexander dropped to one knee. No board, no contracts, no schemes, just him, a man stripped of walls, offering her a ring not of obligation but of devotion. "Claire Bennett Hale," he said, his voice steady yet full of hope. "Will you marry me, not by contract, but by choice?" Her tears fell freely as she whispered, "Yes." Their wedding was small, nothing like the cold ceremony at the courthouse. Friends, loyal staff, and her mother, healthy and smiling, surrounded them. As they exchanged vows, Claire remembered the words that had started it all. "Just one kiss," she murmured, and when their lips met, it was not bound by paper or rules. It was bound by love, and it was forever. And so, what began as a bargain ended as a promise. A promise that even the strongest walls can fall, and even the coldest hearts can learn to love.